Okay, so this is our structural modeling project April additional video, and Kevin Dye is going to lead the presentations for this session. So Kevin, take it away.
Okay, so today I thought we'd give you a preview or a peek at a book that's under development called the code name is The Playbook, and it's meant to be a complement to the Handbook of Interactive Management by John Warfield. The Handbook of Interactive Management was written by Roxana Cardenas and Warfield back in the early 90s. And they sought to lay out a book that covered the methodology of interactive management. And by methodology, they meant the practice portion of what happened in what they called the arena. And their choice of words is very specific because it's words that were used by Charles Sanders Peirce, the American pragmatist, about 100 years earlier. I think we have someone coming on. And they saw, hello, Janet. Warfield and Christakis and Cardenas at the time looked had a model of science that they largely based on Charles Sanders Peirce's model of science, which they called the domain of science model. And the domain, the word domain is used in two ways. Usually domain means the subject matter that you're practicing in. But in this case, the use of domain means when we consider science the subject of the practice, science itself, almost like the philosophy of science. And in the domain of science model, there's four main sections, what they called the foundations, the theory, and the applications was where the methodology was practiced. And so those were the four: foundations, theory, methodology, and applications. And the methodology and the applications were the realm of the arena. And the foundations and theory were the realm of what they called the phaneroscopy, which is a word that Peirce made up, just meaning the total sum of all the library of knowledge. And so the handbook was intended just to do the methodology portion of the domain of science model, and the 2-volume book, Science of Generic Design, was intended to cover foundations and theory. Within that book, he often points to his book of 1976, Societal Systems. And that book, in turn, points to a lot of journal articles in the IEEE Transactions and the Journal of Systems, Man and Cybernetics. And so that's kind of the realm of the foundations and the theory. He never commissioned works on applications to complete documentation of these 4 realms of the domain of science model. And the way it played out is his acolytes would publish an application as a case study. They'd call it a case study. And those are distributed throughout a bunch of journals. And there's never been a collection of case studies. But the funny thing about it is it's not really a case study about the practice. It's an application of the practice in a particular domain or subject matter. For example, revamping the defense acquisition system, or reinventing the Food and Drug Administration to modernize it, or the future of energy efficiency in the Pacific Northwest. So these are, particular applications, and they would document what people would say and what the results were of running the software, but they never talked about what the practitioners actually went through. So in that sense, there were not really case studies. And that's where the playbook wants to fill the void, to talk about the actual experience of practitioners. The Handbook of Interactive Management, while it laid out the methodology, never talked about practical matters. For example, if you're projecting if you're projecting on the wall, how tall should the letters be? How far back should the projector be? Or if you're placing printouts of people's ideas on the wall, how many can you fit per row? Or how many should you try to fit per row? How do you quickly estimate, if you're doing a walkthrough in a hotel, how do you quickly estimate how big the room needs to be for the group that you're having? So there's a lot of hundreds of practical little heuristics that you need to know to be able to do an engagement from beginning to end. So I just want to give you a walkthrough of the considerations. Hello? I think I just lost you.
No.
We're here.
No?
We're
Okay.
here.
You're here.
Ah, there we are. Okay, so
Listening assiduously.
okay, so I'm going to switch to screen share. Okay, so do you see the manual for organizing structured democratic dialogue events?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Just going to let that load. It's a big document. It's currently about 160 pages. So it's kind of a long name. Structured democratic dialogue is the name that the Cypriot practitioners at the Future World Center call interactive management. And it's a variation of a name from the Institute of 21st Century Agores, which is structured dialogic design, and that's trademarked. Structured democratic dialogue is not trademarked, but it tends to be how the Cypriots brand themselves. So you see here, structured dialogic design is a trademark of the Institute of 21st Century Agores. So I should mention
Could you put it in a broader view in your computer here, Kevin? Is it?
Is that
No,
better?
no, it's good, but it's like in a small window, or maybe it's because that's the way it's displayed. Okay, never mind.
Bigger now.
Hmm?
Can you read it?
Yes, we can, but it's not in full screen in the window. It's with lots of different things. But maybe that's the way how a window is shared. It's okay.
Oh, I shared the whole screen. Maybe I should have shared the window.
No, but if you can put the whole, yeah, now it's in the whole screen. Okay, great. Yeah, that's the way it is. I'm sorry. Yeah, I thought it would blow it up broader in my own window, but it doesn't. It's good. It's good. Sorry.
Okay.
Perfect.
So in parallel with this, we have an agreement with Roxana Cardenas to do a new edition of the Handbook of Interactive Management, and we have a nod from Warfield's son that the family would like to see that done. I'm not sure if what we're doing can be released as a new edition, because as I've gone through it, there's so many difficulties I have with it that it requires substantial revision. One of the difficulties, for example, is about at least 50% of the paragraphs have a negative statement about something. So, for example, instead of saying, if you want to have a successful engagement, you should do this, he says, if you don't do this, you will surely fail. And I just find that an unhelpful tone that he takes through the whole book. But so the way this is laid out is what happens 3 months before an event, 10 weeks before an event, 7 weeks, and so forth, up to the days of the event. And then once we get to the event itself, it tells you what goes on every hour. So for example, 3 months out, or by 3 months out, we want to make sure we've met with the sponsor. We're posing a research question about our own case study, taking this application as a case study, and we launch a quality control plan for the event. So not too many things, but some critical things, the most critical being the meeting with the sponsor. About 10 weeks before, a lot of things need to happen. And this is partly my predilection for front-loading the planning phase of an event, because there's always things that take more time than you expect. So we usually have an orientation meeting, which can last from 2 hours to a day, depending on the complexity of the situation. We get the principals, the managers, the sponsors, people that are not necessarily going to participate in the event, but that are commissioning the event. We get them to articulate who they think are key people. That's the stakeholder identification. We make sure that they've set aside a big enough budget to do the event, and especially to be able to say to the participants that at least some of their ideas that have been judged by the group to be the most highly leveraging on the situation can be funded to take action after a workshop. Probably the most effective way to get the planning for a workshop going is to force people to set a date. That before even talking about a lot of other issues. You kind of need to know who's going to be at the workshop, because there's often conferences or something that, or big annual corporate events. There can be conflicts that can sideline your event. But other than these basics, which you get through in a couple hours, setting a date is really mobilizes people. Then we try to figure out who can we get in the room at the workshop, get their commitment early, such that when we send out invitations to the other participants, we can say, here's a few people you might recognize are going to be there. So the participants say, oh, I'd love to be in an event with that person. That's what we call the anchor participants. Then we need people that have domain expertise. So experts, advisors, at least some of the participants. We usually interview a dozen or so participants. Some people think you should identify more. Some don't interview at all. Future World Center often conducts events without interviewing anybody, but their topics are kind of often better understood, like, or at least shared more in common. We outline attributes of other participants. Usually you cannot get everyone into a workshop that you would like to. It's more of a kind of a Senate on an issue than a Congress. We try to get someone representing each point of view, and we don't try to balance it in terms of the numbers of each point of view, but in terms of the variety of points of view. And for that, we outline criteria like we need someone who's an engineer in water, or we need a scientist about gas handling equipment, or whatever. And usually you have to combine these criteria at the end, because you may also want to balance the number of men and women. So when you go to look for a participant, and now you've got 2/3 of your participants confirmed, and you have almost the variety of experts that you want, but you don't have a gender balance. So now we know we're going to look for a scientist in gas handling that's female. In some projects, we assemble a bibliography of the event, and that's put together in what they used to call a white paper. And then for the purpose of designing an event, we look back on cases we have experience with, so that, for example, when we come up with a new design, we can say, look, we've done this type of design before in 2012 in this domain, and it worked well with 36 people. And for your case, we're doing 30 people, and we think it's a similar amount of complexity, and we recommend the same amount of time. And when you've done a similar case, or you can base the design of event on a similar case, it improves the confidence of the sponsor And about 7 weeks before is often the first time the broker and the facilitation teams may meet. Now, there's at this point, in history of interactive management, there's almost no practitioner that has a group of facilitation team members around them such that they can just go do an application. The practitioners are all over the planet, and there's no organization that has even several people that are trained in the facilitation technique. So usually the facilitation teams are assembled from, they're always usually traveling. The best case is in Cyprus. They don't have to travel too far. They're no more than a few hours away from each other. But Yanis does have a number of people in his own organization that can play roles on the facilitation team. He's often bringing them together. And so a couple months before the event, we like them at least to meet and be briefed on the event. And they don't have to understand the subject matter, but they should familiarize the people at least that are going to be tracking the dialogue, you typing it out or transcribing it. There's often domains that have specialized vocabularies, and they need to be familiar with the words of that domain and the acronyms. Because often when you hear an acronym for the first time, your brain tries to make it into a word and they get confused. Then they end up with a transcript that gets laughed out by the participants. I can remember doing events in the pharmaceutical and healthcare realms, and when we went into those applications a few months before, we made sure that the spell checkers in our word processor had the specialized vocabulary as words in the dictionary. It's not something you usually think about. Sometimes the facilitation team meeting a couple months out has to be done virtually. Usually people that become practitioners in interactive management or structured democratic dialogue, it's through a long apprenticeship where they learn multiple roles. And so what we're recommending is that each practitioner, at whatever stage they're in their development, they should set some personal learning goals for each application that they go through. Often that learning goal is, I want to learn a new role. I want to learn how to be the computer operator. I want to learn how to be the display manager. I want to be an assistant facilitator. So often it's by identifying roles, but after you've learned some roles, you may want to get better at a particular thing. So for example, I had played all the roles and I don't know, about 20 years ago, I asked why. We track the dialogue when people say their ideas and clarify them, but we didn't track the dialogue when they were doing interpretive structural modeling. And I wondered why. And so I set a goal, a personal learning goal, to discover a way to track the dialogue during the structural modeling. One of the things I discovered doing that, by the way, is there's usually 70 to 120 pairwise questions posed to participants by the ISM software. And they have dialogues about many of the questions. Does A influence B? But after the first hour and a half or so, the dialogues speed up. and they tend to start answering in unison, where in the beginning, the votes are often very close, 51 to 49% type of close. And we have to carry on the dialogue until someone realizes to say something that convinces everybody to get more towards a unified vote. And what I found in tracking the dialogues was people started citing previous rationales as they went. So they'd say, does A influence B? And then someone would come up with a definitive explanation that convinced everyone to say yes on A influences B. And 15 questions later, we asked, does W influence Z? And someone will say, oh yeah, it does, by the same rationale as A influenced B. And what I found was a group typically develop about 7, 8 rationales for their to talk about the influence of something on another. And after they get about 7 or 8, they start citing themselves. So that was an interesting discovery from my own learning experience. There's still maybe rounding out the number of participants. Getting participants is a snowball search. You ask each person you interact with on a project, you say who should be in the event, and they say, I think this person, that person, this person, that person. You go to those people and you say who should be in such an event. And when you start getting the same people cited over and over again, those are the people that are in the social network that you want to try to get. And we schedule interviews, and then we visit the meeting room facilities. Now we're six weeks before the final location needs to be booked. Now we say 6 weeks before. This isn't kind of an aggressive schedule. It depends on the city you're in, the hotel you're in. There's events I've been involved with. Something had to be booked a year ahead of time. We had an event in Geneva at the President Wilson Hotel. So this is the type of place where the United Nations holds a lot of events. So things are scheduled months and months and months in advance. But this particular model is saying what's the most aggressive we would recommend being. So getting things done by 6 weeks before is about the closest you want to cut it. We try to arrange a social gathering for the night before an event starts, is we want people to meet each other and get through the sizing up and can I trust them and can I get along with them and all the nonverbal communication about being in a group. And we want that social gathering to have no chairs except for someone in a wheelchair or something, because we want them moving around and meeting each other. If they sit, they won't get up and meet other people. They'll sit with the same people all night. We start conducting the interviews. It's usually face-to-face if possible, by phone or Skype, anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours, usually a mix of structured and open-ended questions. The development of the interview itself is a process. And we're looking at background literature by this time. A month out, we've now gotten feedback from 8 to 20 experts, advisors, and participants. We've looked through a lot of the literature, and we try to compose a narrative of the situation, which may just be a long paragraph. We cultivate the triggering question. The triggering question is what's used for the nominal group technique to elicit ideas, right? And the nominal group technique was one of the 7 original methods that Warfield and Christakis adopted into interactive management. And they had one other idea generation technique called idea writing, which hardly anyone uses, but could also be used. But almost everyone uses nominal group technique. And that's what the triggering question is. The question that is used for the structural modeling is referred to as the generic question. I personally disagree that that's a good name for the structuring question. To call it a generic question, it causes a lot of confusion. But that's the difference between these questions. Then we run a simulation of the workshop. We do a walkthrough. We try to generate the ideas that are going to come out in the workshop. Now this is for a high risk workshop where it has a lot of visibility, there's a lot of money on the table because of the participants' time and so forth. We don't want to screw up the workshop, so we want to anticipate how it's going to run. And a lot of the ideas that are going to come out have probably already been published. There's been some events where we've used the ideas that came out before the event through interviews and the literature, and we've posted them on the wall and put them in the white paper, but we still ask for the ideas at the beginning of the event. So having done a walkthrough of the workshop, usually we do the walkthrough with other participants, other practitioners, so that emerging practitioners can have a chance to practice their role and ask more experienced practitioners how to do their role. To actually sit in a small meeting room and run the event. We plan out the schedule of the event from there. So we have to have an idea about how many ideas are going to get put on the table. Because if you're going to have 80 ideas, you need a certain amount of time. If you're going to have 300 ideas, you need a lot more time. We try to get bios from all the participants to publish to all the participants so everyone can read who's who. This also gives us a good reason not to spend a lot of time with people doing introductions in the morning. We just, if you're interested in someone's background, read their bio. We give them the bios of people before they come to the event. If they haven't read them, then we have to ask, is it really, if you're not interested in people ahead of time, should we really spend the entire group's time for the people that didn't read? We put together a white paper. The white paper has a summary of all the interviews, the structured questions, the open-ended questions, a review of the literature. Now it depends on how many resources are thrown at a project like this. This model is roughly about a $40,000 event. $40,000 3-day event that includes a white paper, literature review, interviews. But there's events that are done for $5,000, and unless you have a volunteer, you don't get to do a literature review. Coming into 3 weeks before, we try to make sure everyone has finished their travel arrangements, and we usually have to chase down the participants to make sure that they've done it. Well, we used to just, in the 90s, we did that by coordinating with the organization's travel agent. And we would just give them the details, and the travel agent would book it for the participant. But now everyone's expected to do it themselves, and then people are not as disciplined as a travel agent. We've been testing the triggering question with the participants. So as part of calling them to make sure they've booked their travel, we ask them to respond, or if they could see how to respond to the triggering question we've come up with. And we still may be using a couple different versions of triggering questions, because even sometimes slight modifications to the wording can change how people understand a question. Then there's a role we call the broker. This was coined by Warfield. The broker was someone that was familiar with interactive management from having previously been in an event, but also knows the lead executive in charge of the project, and maybe even the sponsor. And that the broker's the go-between the client and the facilitation team. And when we come into an event, we want someone representing the client, the highest executive involved, to deliver the triggering question. Because the triggering question is symbolic of the commissioning of the event by the client. The facilitator doesn't care what the question is. It's not meaningful to the facilitator generally. It's meaningful to the client. So we have the client ask it, because if there's a question about what it means, the client has to answer it. The facilitation team should not answer it. So we coach the client how to pose the triggering question to the participants. We also coach the broker in case the client doesn't show up, as well as the sponsor. We coach the sponsor because the sponsor is the one with the money. They may have to explain to someone on their board of directors why they're giving money to this event. And should say it's because we want to answer the following question. Here's the question. So we train them. It's a type of a facilitation role. We don't spend too much time on it. 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of the event. Then we usually ask the client to leave. Client wants to leave anyway. They always have another meeting to go to. Sponsor, we don't want in the event because it makes him too nervous to watch the sausage being made. But the broker will stay in the event. 2 weeks before, we deliver the white paper to the participants. That's got all the subject matter. It's got all the bio stuff. It's got travel info, and the information about where they're staying and sites they may want to visit, the days following the event, and all of that. So a nice package for them. My experience, if it's read at all, most people read it on the plane on the way to the event. Excuse me. We asked the participants to have to deflect their phone calls for the period that they'll be in the workshops to other people in their organization. It is not easy to do. but we want their cell phones off for 3 days, basically. We don't want them to catch up on their phone calls during the meals, because the meals are orchestrated socializing events. Because a big part of what we're doing in these events is we're usually bringing people together that have never met each other, and we want them to get to know each other. And that happens during the meals and the socials. And we don't want them on their phone. We don't want them going back to their room. So they basically have to go offline and think about this and engage these people for 3 days. And then the facilitation team checks all of the equipment, the beamer, or what they call the beamer, the display, the screen that needs to go up and down, the computers, all those, the printer. The thing that goes wrong the most is the printer. But you should know where the backup light bulbs are for the display unit. You should know whose computer you're going to use if yours dies, which can happen because you're running this event on adrenaline for 3 days, and you drink a lot of coffee, and the coffee ends up on the table next to the computer. And I've seen it more than once. The coffee ends up on the keyboard and the computer's down. And you have to, within 90 seconds or so, be on the backup computer and working with the latest backup you have of the data of the dialogue, and be up and going. So this is done a few weeks ahead of time, so that if we need another cartridge for the printer, another bulb for the display, we can do all that. 1 week before, we do a little training of the facilitation team members, especially for the younger ones. This is the ideal situation, that we have time to do that, or people are committed enough as team members to get together. And you see, I've noted that it's in this playbook, we've written that the participants make final preparations. The participants have a responsibility for the event. The handbook of interactive management is written for a facilitator, but the participants have a number of important roles to make an event successful. And so this playbook was based on what was called the National Forum model for the National Patient Safety Foundation. And we wrote it as a contract of the things that the participants were responsible for and the things the facilitation team were responsible for, so that it was clear. It wasn't just what does the facilitation team have to do. It's what are all the things the client is expected to do that we're helping them with. So that was kind of the stance. That's why you see things like participants have to do this. They have to do their final travel arrangements. They need to read the white paper. They need to get someone to stand in for their phone calls. They need to make final preparations on the projects they're working on so they can stop working on it for several days. 3 days before, we make sure we have things like the stickers for the wall. We often do not have final participant lists until even a few days before the event. So seating arrangements, try to get finalized by then. When we make the seating arrangements, if we're doing a two-part project, like we're going to address a structure of challenges and a structure of actions, usually a structure of challenges, say if we have 36 people, we'll sit them in groups of 3 and get one idea per group of 3 as we go around the table. And to enable them to have quick discussions about it, we'll sit people that we think have a similar background. But for the action group, usually they're sitting in a group of about 5 people together, we'll try to make it a very mixed, heterogeneous seating arrangement. We print out tags, table tents, so that the facilitator can just look at someone and glance at their name. And the best facilitation teams have a binder with a bunch of dividers in it, and as products are produced during the event, the holes are already punched. They just go into the binder, and the participants walk out of a 3-day event with a book, all their words. The afternoon and night before, you usually can't set up the meeting room before the night before. You set up and test the equipment, and that nowadays often involves displays owned by the hotel. So you have to make sure you know how to operate that and it's working properly, because you're going to have to get a staff member to fix it if it's not working. So you got to start before the end of the day for that person. And then if it doesn't work, you have to have priority on that person's time. So this kind of little risky business. You show up and there's the display, you're dead. So you have to have your own backup display, but also the hotel is usually going to have a better setup, but doesn't always work. One thing that sometimes doesn't work is the compatibility with the computer. I've seen all kinds of strange things happen because of some default was set on someone's computer, didn't display right. By this time the team members have come in, usually this is the afternoon before the event starts, and we do a quick run through with the facilitation team. I've been in events where the facilitation team did not meet each other until this moment. And they all knew their roles. They're all experienced and performed perfectly. But they needed to at least touch base and do a quick walkthrough so they felt in sync with each other. A big part of what happens during that is you're learning people's nonverbal communications, because the only person that should talk during the event is the lead facilitator. Everyone else that needs to communicate with each other needs to have hand signals, nods, and so forth. The staff are welcome in registration table, just like a conference. Usually we try to get the broker to have an administrative assistant do that. And then we have a socializing event, usually a cocktail and hors d'oeuvres engagement type of thing. And that finally brings us to the event. There's always some type of logistics problem. You got 36 people coming in, and there's always problems with their travel. This person can't make it till 10 o'clock. This person spilled coffee all over their pants. They have to go back somewhere and buy a new pair of clothes or whatever. I've seen a million different problems. And you don't want, this is one thing, this is something that we assign to the client. The facilitators are often, people try to draw the facilitators in to help them with things that involve the logistics of the participants. And we don't want anything to do with it because they're not paying us enough. They're not paying us for enough people to do that. They're just paying for us to run the event. We didn't write in the contract, we're going to handle this person's travel problems, that person's clothing problems, this person's sick, needs to go to the hospital. There needs to be someone on site that manages the logistics, which is not the broker. So the client poses the triggering question. We explain to the group what we want them to do in just 2 minutes or so. And we do that. We go through, the event is then, we go through triggering question, people clarify it, ask questions about it in a round robin around the table. Then we go to clustering. We move things that are similar to each other into similar groups. And then we go through structuring. That's where we do the structural modeling. So this is finally where we come to structural modeling. So we have over 50 actions that happen to prepare ourselves to use structural modeling. And in 3 months, it starts doing structural modeling, at least by this model, is a 3-month affair. Just 3 months of prep to spend, 2 to 4 hours of structural modeling. So that gives you some context of the method. A lot of the times when we talk about structural modeling, we just talk about using it as if almost like we're an individual and you can just use it, which you can. And there's a lot of applications that are written up like that. People just use structural modeling to help them organize themselves. But if you have a complex situation that is poorly defined, where you need to bring dozens of people into the room that have never all met each other, they need to perform and complete this work in a space of 3 days, and they haven't heard all their each other's ideas before. This is kind of what it takes. I've been involved in events that took a year to prepare. This is, as I mentioned, about a $40,000 type of project where we were bringing together a lot of doctors and healthcare experts, and they have a little more heavy-handed way of being facilitated. And then at the end of the event, we debrief the team and kind of go over what went right, what went wrong, type of thing, a continuous improvement type of activity. We go through post reviews. Then we start writing a final report, which takes all the material from the white paper as well as what was produced in the workshop. We ask the participants to offer reflections on the work that may also go into the final report. Often we're involved with issuing press releases. We're asked to write them along with a communications person. And that's someone we try to meet with 3 months before the event. We try to meet, if an organization is big enough to have a communications or a public relations staff, we try to meet with them before the event's even planned. Because they usually want to issue a press release as the event completes within the hour. And it needs to be prepared ahead. They want a press release prepared before the results of the workshop. So there's a lot that goes into preparing a final report, typical of editing any final report. And we recommend that the practitioners touch base with other practitioners to tell them about their experience and share the case. And then in the year following the event, usually we try to get something published in a journal about the application. Increasingly, as I mentioned when we started this, we want to do it as a case. We want to do case studies from the practitioner's standpoint, not just what the application is in the domain that the participant said, but what was the practitioner's experience? Was it difficult to pull together this particular set of participants, and why, and so forth? So I think we'll stop here. I'll turn the screen back.
Thank you, Kevin. That was great. Interesting overview. So what is your timeline for publishing the document?
For the playbook?
Right.
Yeah. We don't have one, really. They wanted me to get something done. I started this last year, last April or May, and took a break, and then started again when I was back in Cyprus, and they wanted us to try to get something done for this spring. So that's kind of but it's a working document. We don't think it's something that is ready for this spring, but it's pretty complete for giving people a sense of what should be done, but it's not clean enough to publish. But Giannis and the Future World Center have some contracts to do structured democratic dialogue events around Europe. They're doing half a dozen of them or so. And every time he does an event, he always has some people that want to become a practitioner or learn to become a broker to apply the method in one of their own domains. So they were looking for it for this spring for using it. So they'll probably use the online version for that for now.
Huh. Yeah, it's a fantastic piece of work. I never pictured, as you're walking through in the detail, you really get a sense of what's involved. I knew it was a lot of work, and I knew that there's lots of things that can go wrong, but I didn't. It's great to see it all laid out. I had to step in and out, so I probably missed some of your couching of the whole thing. But I heard you mention that there are paragraphs of text that have negative statements that bother you.
Yeah, the Handbook of Interactive Management. It's Warfield's communication style.
Right.
He, for example, instead of saying, if you do X, it will help you perform this part of the project. Instead, what he says, if you don't do X, you will fail, like so many managers I've seen fail before because of their arrogance.
Right. That's right.
He does that every other paragraph.
Right. Okay.
And it's you say, okay, he hates managers. That's clear. And as you go through the book,
defensiveness, right.
He just said, he hates more and more people. It's
right. As you slog along, right.
The head of him.
Do you have a diagram of all of this?
Yeah, there's a bunch of diagrams in the playbook. Let's see if I can quickly get a few. Yeah, we have some dozens of diagrams.
Could you distribute those to the list or whatever? Or are you going to keep those closely held?
Yeah, I'll talk to Yana. So maybe we can just invite you to take a look at it in Google Docs and allow people to comment on it. But then they could walk through all the graphics. It would be quite an effort to take the graphics out of Google Docs.
Right, just seeing them
but to to see them.
Now, I'm very valuable, and so what do you need help with to get it out?
To get their playbook out.
The whole playbook, yeah.
Yeah, having some eyes on it would be helpful. I mean, I didn't expect to be working on it this year, but Giannis happened to have a bunch of European contracts to run these things, so he wanted it, and so I set to working on it while I was over there, and but no one's looked at it other than me.
Right. Okay.
So let me talk to him and see how he feels about having folks look at it. I think he'll just say it's a good idea.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So I just found a handbook of interactive management, something published in 93 and 2002 that has 352 pages. Is this what you were talking about?
Yeah, that
original one that you are meant to rewrite. Is that it, or are we talking about something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but rewriting that is a different project than this playbook.
Oh, okay. So the playbook and the handbook are two different things. But listening to you and looking at the way the handbook is organized, I'm wondering if you aren't actually writing a pattern, what others call a pattern language. Meaning a set of best practices on how to do things and how to assemble them in a certain way.
Helene, that's really an excellent observation, because I was thinking about the CMMIs we used to do and the system audits we used to do in large organizations, where we had to get groups of people together, ask them questions, do their feedback, and there's just a tremendous similarity in the steps. So I think there's some kind of pattern there, but sorry for interrupting.
So I put some patterns of group works that organize events, but I think it's more on the relational and how to get I think the human stuff going on more than the hard organization bits. But if you're interested, Kevin, I have lots of stuff about pattern languages. It's been used a lot. I don't know if you know what I'm referring to or not.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to Chris Alexander's work originally.
Yes, and then used by software developers and all kinds of domains after that. So, I mean, if you're going to rewrite things in a certain way, I mean, maybe it can help you. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe we can adopt some conventions of how people depict the pattern languages.
Yes, because this is something that is actually structured. So you have a certain number of ways of presenting things, like you talk about a problem, its context, and then a solution, and then you attach the patterns that are related to it. So it's a way to actually organize the data in form of a network, basically. So I don't know if if it makes sense in the context of what you are doing, but if you're planning to rewrite it because, you were saying that lots of it is not, has to be changed in the form in a certain way, maybe at least to give ideas, it would be interesting to have a look.
You mean the handbook? Or
I'm not sure if the playbook and the handbook, to me, looking at the handbook, which is a set of Well, probably the playbook is a set of good practices or best practices on how to organize things beforehand, right?
Yeah,
What you just ran through.
right.
Yeah, so this is typically what a pattern language would deal with. I mean, it just came to my mind, and I posted in the chat an existing pattern language for group works. They called group works, but which I said is much more, from what I remember, much more about the relation sides, the relational sides, like provide some, some food and, how to get people happy. But I was more thinking, so that's one thing. But the other thing is the structure of what they're using for software development and design could be something that could provide some, some interest in the case of a playbook. I'm wondering. Yeah.
I had a similar but different thought, which was that the way Kevin is doing this, because there's a very targeted need in the ISM application area, and there's even, there are people who need it this summer, and that kind of thing. So it's a very focused effort for him to put together his expertise for that particular kind of effort. Then when you look at what he came up with, there's insight there that is generally applicable outside of ISM. So for anybody who's doing some kind of group learning event, I was thinking about it for ISSS, and Peter just stepped out, but I was thinking about a lot of it applies to the things we think about for an ISSS meeting. Well, of course, a lot of this is, Jennifer does this for every conference, but then we think about socialization events, and should we have them talk about a particular question that we ask each of the special integration groups, that kind of thing. So I was thinking about how Kevin is motivated by a very focused use, but it provides insight that is more generally, it's a more generic pattern that outside of his own project could be taken, or maybe Kevin could do it as a second project and write a playbook for any kind of.
But when I say pattern language, I don't say something generic that will be for use for the whole world. I mean, there are pattern languages that are written for specific projects.
Right, but I'm thinking that
they have a format that is, let's say, interoperable and can be easily exported to connect with other projects or to become more generic. Just a thought.
Right. Well, see, my point was that I don't know if thinking in those terms would help Kevin at this point. I can see that that's moving to the generic level, or thinking in terms of making this more generic. Does that help Kevin and Janis achieve their goal?
But I'm not talking about making it generic at all. I'm saying that there are non-generic projects that are developed in the format of a pattern language, so they can become, if needed, more generic. But it can be done in totally tailored and customized
right, but
way.
You're saying if needed, more generic, but that means that he has to put some intellectual resources.
Oh yeah, of course.
Concern into thinking about whether it should become more generic. Where I don't know if that is a helpful. I don't know if that's a helpful lens for him to be thinking about this, given the amount of effort that is required just for this. That's all I'm saying, is that I think sometimes when you think about patterns, you're you're shifting your orientation to a meta level. And I don't know if having, if thinking on the meta level is helpful to Kevin in achieving what he's trying to achieve at this point.
Yeah, well,
that's just my reaction.
Yeah, but the specific software design things are not necessarily on the meta level. But I'll leave that there. It was just a suggestion that I can provide some information on the structures of pattern languages. Okay, no problem.
I think it'd be useful for me to look at the format and structure of how they present, of how people present pattern language work.
That was my point, yes.
Yeah.
And I think to go along here, I think again, start wrapping this up. We're a little bit longer than usual, but it's been a great conversation. One thing I'd like to just kind of throw in here in an ad hoc manner is an idea of knowledge storming. There's brainstorming, idea writing, all those types of things. In highly complex distributed systems a few years ago, some folks came up with a concept they called knowledge storming, which had different techniques, high density automatic data acquisition among large groups. And you know, you can Google search that or whatever, but it's kind of something that's also fits a typical type of pattern, whether it's to discover information about unknown ideas or to discover information about existing idea in audit. So it's just interesting, very interesting stuff.
Yeah, well, in the 70s, they Warfield, Christakis, and other people at Battelle Memorial Institute evaluated 60 to 70 methods, and they had a dozen criteria. And from their evaluation, they picked 7 methods. Nominal group technique and instructional modeling were 2 of the methods. And I mean, years later, by the time Warfield wrote his book on complexity, he said all you need is nominal group technique and interpretive structural modeling. You don't need the other 5. But I say it's a good time to, you know, it's 40 years later now, review, you know, go through a new set of criteria, review the methods again, and reconstitute the method base, you know. But it's an interesting difference between a lot of what you see facilitators do is they want to add more and more and more methods to their resume. It's like the features wars of the old computer-aided design days, that people add more and more and more features. And where Warfield arrived was, oh, you only need 2. I mean, you could substitute other idea generation techniques for nominal group technique. It's not the only idea generation technique. There's better creativity techniques for generating ideas than nominal group technique.
Yeah, so there's, within the group communication piece, there's been tremendous advances, of course, in technology, as you pointed out. And so she had total video recording of everything going on. Then you had the video analysis going on concurrently, letting out the concepts, the words, the definitions, flagging the words and definitions that might be confused. You can do all that now automatically in the background. That's knowledge storming.
Oh, that's interesting. Is there? This also raises the question of the smart whiteboard, and how might that fit into this? It doesn't. I guess I hadn't thought of going to the point of actually doing real-time processing on the conversation that people were having and picking out words and concepts and things like that. That's pretty amazing.
Highly doable.
Yeah.
Easily done.
Very interesting. So what, Kevin, is there a resource with the 7 techniques and their analysis of them, or was that not written?
The evaluation they did.
Yeah.
I had I once had a slide of the 60 or 70 they evaluated, but I don't think, and the list of criteria.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember like a paper or something about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was more like slides.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I can't remember.
Yeah, so that would be a very interesting project for the pattern language approach, because then you're working on that question of talking about idea generation techniques and more of a we need a pattern for idea generation, or that kind of thing. If you were revisiting that and doing a complete taxonomy, which would be wonderful. The NCOSE Fellows also, I think about 10 years ago, did a project where they identified all of the basic problem-solving methods, including OODA and Plan, Do, Check, Act, and action research, and I guess more systems engineering kind of things as well. I can share that with you. You've probably seen it. What they came up with was an acronym SIMILAR for the steps that were needed in the problem solving sequence. So the NCOSE Fellows did their own survey, and there was a paper written on it. So I'll send that around.
Yeah, I'm interested in this. Yeah. Okay, should we wrap? Because I'll need to leave, or do you want to continue? I don't know.
Yeah, let's wrap it. Thank you for today.
Kevin, could we meet?
Yeah, that sounds good. You must be on one of the emails that Joe sent out. Is that right, Joe?
Yeah, I'm on the list. Yeah.
Yes, she's on the list.
Yeah, let's try to connect in the next few weeks. Have a cup of coffee.
Okay, great. And Janet, I'd like to talk with